What if, in the year 1500, Persia attacked Native America? And what if they had absolutely no idea what was waiting for them? This is not fantasy. Every weapon, every tactic, every battle strategy you are about to hear is pulled straight from real historical records. We are going to war, on paper, and we are going to find out, once and for all, who actually wins. Let's set the stage, and let's start with the side most people underestimate. The year is 1501. A 15-year-old boy named Ismail emerges from hiding in a small city in northern Iran. He has no throne, no army, no treasury, just followers, fiercely devoted, fanatically loyal, willing to die for him without hesitation. Within 9 years, he controlled the entire Iranian plateau, from the borders of Central Asia to the gates of Mesopotamia. Cities that had resisted armies for generations fell to him in weeks. His name is Shah Ismail I, and the empire he built, the Safavid Empire, is one of the most extraordinary military stories of the 16th century. His army was built around a core of warriors known as the Kizilbash. The name means redheads, after the crimson headdress they wore in battle. These were not ordinary soldiers fighting for wages. They were warrior mystics who believed Shah Ismail was literally descended from the Prophet Muhammad. That belief transformed them into something rare in military history, a fighting force driven not by money or orders, but by absolute, unbreakable faith. Their weapons were formidable: steel-forged shamshir curved swords designed for lethal efficiency on horseback, heavy lances for the initial charge, powerful composite bows fired with precision at full gallop, their armor steel mail crafted in the workshops of Shiraz, considered among the finest metalwork in the known world, covered not just the rider, but the horse beneath him. Now, here is something critical that most people miss about this army, and it changes everything that follows. In 1500, the Safavids were still primarily a cavalry force. They had some gunpowder weapons, basic siege cannons, but artillery was not yet central to how they fought. We know this because of what happened just 13 years later. In 1514, at a place called Chaldiran, the Ottoman Empire marched east with a modern gunpowder army, 200 heavy cannons, thousands of musket-armed Janissary infantry, the finest combined arms force in the world. The Safavid cavalry charged them with swords and bows. The result was a devastating defeat. Shah Ismail was wounded and escaped with his life, but he never personally led an army into battle again. The lesson cost him everything. So what we are sending into this hypothetical war is a battle-hardened, tactically sophisticated cavalry empire, fast, disciplined, and ferocious, but one that still relies on the blade, the lance, and the bow, before the age of gunpowder changed them forever. Now, let's meet their opponents. Here is the first mistake almost everyone makes when they think about this matchup. They picture a single culture, a single army, one person standing across a battlefield. They are wrong. Native America in 1500 is not one people. It is hundreds of distinct nations, each with different languages, different weapons, different philosophies of war, and profoundly different ways of making your life a living nightmare if you enter their territory uninvited. For this analysis, we are focusing on 3 of them because together they cover every possible terrain where this war could be fought and every possible style of warfare Persia might face. First, the Apache, masters of desert and mountain guerrilla warfare. Apache warriors were trained in stealth from the time they could walk. They could move silently across rocky, broken terrain in complete darkness, close the distance on an enemy position undetected, and strike with devastating speed before disappearing into the landscape. Unlike the Comanche, who thrived in open combat, the Apache made themselves nearly impossible to find and nearly impossible to destroy. You could not fight what you could not see. Second, the Comanche. American historian S.C. Gwynn called them, without hesitation, the greatest light cavalry on earth. At full gallop, a Comanche warrior could fire an entire quiver of arrows accurately while hanging sideways off his horse, using the animal's body as a living shield between himself and enemy fire. Their horsemanship was, by every account left by people who witnessed it, unlike anything the world had ever seen before. Now, here is an important qualifier. In the year 1500, before Spanish horses spread widely across the continent, most plains peoples were not yet riding in battle. That changes the open field equation significantly, but it does not change what the Comanche were capable of as warriors. Third, the Iroquois Confederacy, also called the Haudenosaunee, and this is where the Persian commanders would face something they had never encountered and could not have prepared for. The Iroquois were not a tribe. They were a nation of nations, a sophisticated political and military alliance of 5, later 6, separate peoples, unified under a constitution that predated the United States by centuries. Their forest warfare was so psychologically devastating that enemy tribes would often flee at the mere rumor of an approaching Iroquois war party. European observers described their warriors as men who could endure extraordinary pain without making a sound, soldiers in the most complete sense of the word, shaped by a culture that made warfare into a discipline. Historians estimate that between 1500 and 1890, there were over 1,000 battles and wars between indigenous nations and peoples of European descent, enemies who arrived with gunpowder, cannons, and professional armies. And in that span of nearly 400 years, native warriors repeatedly inflicted catastrophic casualties on better-equipped invaders. In 1790 and 1791, a confederation of native fighters near the Ohio frontier dealt the young United States Army two of the worst defeats in its entire history. These were not primitive warriors. These were military professionals, men operating within systems of warfare their cultures had refined and perfected over hundreds of years, and they were about to face something none of them had ever seen before. Scenario 1. Open terrain. The Great Plains. Flat, treeless, hundreds of miles of grassland stretching to the horizon in every direction. In this environment, the Persian cavalry has a decisive advantage. They are organized, experienced, and they fight as a unified force built around one doctrine: speed and formation. Their hammer and anvil tactics, fast cavalry wings that curve around enemy flanks, crushing from two directions simultaneously, had broken armies across Central Asia and the Middle East against foot warriors in 1500 on flat open ground with no horses to match their speed and no cover to disappear behind. The Kizilbash would be almost unstoppable. The steel armor deflects the first volleys of arrows. The horses close the distance before a second full volley can be fired. The curved swords do the rest. On the open plains in 1500, Persia wins, and it would not be close. But here is where the Persian commanders would make their first catastrophic mistake. Winning the open field battle, they would believe the war is almost over. It has barely started. The Persian army follows the retreating warriors into the forest, and this is where everything changes. Heavy horses become a liability overnight. Every hoofstep snaps a branch, announces a position, destroys the silence that kept the army invisible on the plains. Riders cannot see more than 20 feet in any direction. The tight formations that made them lethal in the open are physically impossible among the trees. The army spreads out, command breaks down, the flanks lose contact with the center, and then silence. You do not hear the arrow before it kills the man beside you. Iroquois warriors trained their entire lives to move through old-growth forest without making a sound. Apache scouts could track an enemy column through mountain terrain, plan an ambush at the perfect bottleneck, execute it with devastating precision, and vanish before survivors could form a defensive line. There is no front, there is no flank. The attack comes from every direction at once, and then it comes from nowhere at all. European armies who first encountered this style of warfare, armies with muskets and cannon and centuries of battlefield experience, described it as fighting ghosts. They would patrol a forest for days without seeing a single enemy, and then lose a dozen men in 30 seconds, and then be alone again in the silence. The Safavids would face a war with no visible enemy, no city to conquer, no king to capture, no formation to break. Every step forward costs more than it is worth. Every camp is under threat. Every supply line bleeds. Every scout who rides out alone does not come back. They would begin to ask themselves a question that no army can afford to ask. Are we winning, or are we being slowly eaten alive? Now here's the question that actually decides this war, and it has nothing to do with weapons. It is about time and adaptation, because the Safavids were not inflexible. We know this precisely because of what happened after Chaldiran. They suffered a catastrophic defeat at the hands of Ottoman gunpowder technology, and they did not collapse. They overhauled their entire military from the ground up. Artillery corps, musketeer battalions, completely reformed battle doctrine, and within a generation, they had become one of the gunpowder empires of the Islamic world. They were extraordinary learners. So imagine the Safavid army after 2 years in the forests and mountains of North America, taking losses, watching, studying, adapting. History tells us they were capable of exactly that kind of transformation under pressure. But here is the other side of that coin. And this is where it gets genuinely fascinating. Indigenous nations were not static either. They were among the most rapid military adapters in recorded history. Consider this: the Comanche acquired horses from Spanish settlements in the 1680s. Within 2 generations, they had built a horse culture so dominant, so complete, so devastating in its application to warfare that it took the United States Army, with rifles, artillery, and overwhelming numbers, over a century to stop them. Give the Comanche 80 years with Safavid war horses and Persian cavalry archery techniques, and what you have is genuinely terrifying to contemplate. This war would not be won by the side with the best weapons on the first day. It would be won by the side that adapted fastest to its enemy. And on that question, that single decisive question, history gives us no clear winner. Both sides were extraordinary. Both had survived and conquered through relentless, intelligent adaptation. The war would become something neither side expected, not a test of armor or arrows, but a test of minds. So, Here's the honest answer, and it is not the one most people expect. On open ground, in a conventional engagement, the Safavid Qizilbash cavalry almost certainly wins. Their armor, their formation tactics, their experience in large-scale organized warfare, it gives them an overwhelming advantage against foot warriors on flat terrain. That part is clear. But in the forest, the mountain, the desert, fighting on indigenous terms, on indigenous land, against warriors who have spent their entire lives learning to use that land as a weapon, the Persian army is in serious trouble. The guerrilla traditions of the Apache, the Iroquois, and their allies would slowly, methodically, and without mercy, dismantle even the most disciplined invading force. History has proven this again and again across 4 centuries of attempted conquest. And in a long war of attrition, which any realistic invasion would inevitably become, no one wins cleanly. The Safavids might hold the open ground. Indigenous nations would hold everything else. It would not end in conquest. It would end in exhaustion, a bloody, grinding stalemate, the kind that history is full of, and the kind that no general on either side ever plans for. The most powerful lesson in this entire scenario is not about swords or arrows or horses. It is this: throughout history, the armies that have failed most catastrophically have been the ones who assumed that winning the first battle meant winning the war. Cortés underestimated the Aztecs. Napoleon underestimated Russia. The British underestimated America. In every case, the invaders arrived with superior technology. And in every case, the people defending their home found a way to make that technology irrelevant. Strength is not a weapon. Strength is knowing how to use one. My verdict? On the open field, Persia. In the deep wilderness, on the mountains, in the desert, that belongs to the people who were already there. And in the long game, the side that adapts fastest is the side that survives.